Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the post-lunch session. Difficult for everybody, the speaker, the listeners, the participants, everywhere it's a very tough session. That was the first session, immediate post-lunch. However, speakers are so experienced and experts, they'll really hold us to their presentations pinned down. Before we invite the speakers for this session, we have a small add-on module before we begin. Synergia Foundation has a few statements to make, a couple of thoughts to exchange, and then a small video for you to watch, a couple of minutes of video. And to do all this favor, we have Sneha associated with Synergia Foundation. Sneha, please take the dais.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed lunch. Before we begin, could I please request all of you to switch off your cell phones or put them on silent mode? We don't want to interrupt the speakers in the middle of their presentations. Thanks. This next session is going to discuss serious weapons of mass destruction that are nuclear, biological, chemical, and radiological in nature. Now, speaking of nuclear, today is Hiroshima Day. World War II ended when an atomic bomb was dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima, resulting in the loss of over 200,000 lives. What's worse is that generations of people there are still facing the after effects of that one single bomb. It's scary, isn't it, about how much and for how long the effects of one meager bomb can last for. This session to follow will primarily deal with ways to manage these very threats. Now, before Mr. Subramania introduces our esteemed experts, we have something for you. The Synergia Foundation, the knowledge partner to this event, collaborates with a large network of academia, think tanks, and technology institutions. The Simulation Center in the US is one such organization that develops technology in computation modeling, simulation, and design. We now have a video for you by them about the containment of a chemical leak. Enjoy.
Spring 2013, 9:47 a.m. Major American city. A tanker trailer carrying 9,000 gallons of liquid chlorine careens out of control. In its path, 160,000 downtown workers and close to 10,000 motor vehicle drivers, all unaware of the danger closing in on them. Just yards away, a sensor mounted on a utility pole immediately detects and then transmits the nature of the release and the tanker's GPS location to the citywide wireless network. It is then relayed to the supercomputers at the Public Safety Disaster Mitigation System, 1,400 miles away in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Simultaneously, using technologies from Genie, a slice of the city's networking infrastructure is dynamically created and dedicated to the emergency response. 9:48. 15-mile-per-hour winds are blowing the chlorine gas through the streets. Meanwhile, the supercomputers are analyzing the transmitted data as well as local weather conditions and immediately creating a plume distribution scenario. 9:49. Just 3 minutes after the accident, the disaster mitigation system is using the dynamically created network to transmit emergency response and evacuation information back to emergency personnel in the affected city at the speed of 600 megabytes per second. A Genie rack in the city combines the supercomputer projections with pre-stored city-specific maps and coordination team information. 9:50. Even before they reach the accident scene, emergency management teams and first responders are receiving unique job-specific information in real-time 3D, indicating the safest paths to the scene for workers who will perform the cleanup, and the safest, most efficient paths away from the scene for the citizens placed in harm's way. 9:56. 9 minutes after the accident, emergency personnel are positioned at major intersections to redirect traffic. 10:02. Hazmat teams are moving in behind the plume to accelerate the cleanup and minimize the threat. Emergency evacuation instructions are being sent to tens of thousands of smartphones, instructing their owners whether to stay put or move and which way to go. 10:07. The noxious cloud creeps eastward, only now it passes over streets that are largely deserted and buildings that have been sealed against the toxic danger. 11:30 a.m. The cloud is dissipated, and an event that could have cost thousands of lives has been mitigated through the real-time transmission and analysis of data and the immediate relay of life-saving procedures via the Genie technologies and the supercomputers at the Public Safety Disaster Mitigation System.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. And Dr. Kulkarni will help us understand a little more about it in a short while from now. And in this session, it is emergency response to NBC threats. It's a panel discussion. In the chair, we have Professor S. Gopal, Professor Strategic Studies, NIAS, Bangalore. Professor, can we have you on dais? Professor Gopal, welcome, sir. Yeah, thank you. We have Dr. Lieutenant Colonel Shailesh Kulkarni from CME Pune. Welcome on dais, Dr. Kulkarni. Mr. L.V. Krishnan, Dr. Jaya Sundi, affiliates CSTEP. May we have you on dais, gentlemen? Yeah. One full session of putting our hands together also keeps us awake and pretty much in sync with the session. Professor S. Gopal is going to be in the chair of the panel discussion. Shri S. Gopal retired as a Special Secretary in the Cabinet Secretariat after serving the Government of India for more than 3.5 decades in strategic and security departments. After retirement, he was associated with the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore, NIAS, where was till recently visiting professor occupying Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee chair. He is now an adjunct professor at the institute and is involved in study of terrorism as well as China. Thank you, sir. He is the author of Rise of China, Indian Perceptions. It is based on a seminar held in NIAS with participation of experts both from government and private sector. He is currently working on a book on law and terrorism. He is also interested in study of use of technology in intelligence and counterterrorism. That's Professor S. Gopal for us. Let me have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Lieutenant Colonel Shailesh Kulkarni. He is an alumnus of Dr. V. Medical College, Solapur, was commissioned in Army Medical Corps in 1997. He has served extensively in counterinsurgency and counter-terrorist as well as high-altitude area in Jammu and Kashmir. He served in Operation Vijay and Operation Parakram. He gained substantial experience in management of men and material during war, while he was posted in Field Hospital in J&K. He has also served as Assistant Registrar of a super specialty military hospital. Dr. Kulkarni is a voracious reader, avid photographer, and has keen interest in Indian classical music. He has been contributing articles for publications in the area of CBRN defense. Lieutenant Colonel Shailesh Kulkarni is currently posted as Instructor Class A in Faculty of NBC Protection at College of Military Engineering, Pune. Mr. L.V. Krishnan and Dr. Jaya Sundi. Mr. L.V. Krishnan directed the Safety Research and Health Physics programs in IGCA Kalpakkam for several years before retirement in 1997. He is the co-author of the book Atomic Energy in India, 50 Years, a historical account published by the Department of Atomic Energy in 1998, and of Elements of Nuclear Power, intended for school children, published by Gandhi Science Center of Bharati Vidya Bhavan. He is presently an affiliate of Center for Study of Science, Technology and Policy, CSTEP, Bengaluru, adjunct faculty of National Institute of Advanced Studies, NIAS, Bengaluru, and associate member of Chennai Center for China Studies. Dr. Jayasundi of CSTEP, Bengaluru, holds a doctorate and MS from Carnegie Mellon University and BTech from IIT Bombay. His interest is information technology for development. He works on problems of emergency management and the development of decision support systems for public policy problems. He is a member of the IEEE and has been faculty at the University of Texas at Dallas. Over to Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Sneha reminded us that's a very appropriate day to talk about nuclear disasters because this is the anniversary of the Hiroshima, Nagasaki. We are going to talk, from what I see, is about nuclear and radiological disaster as well as bioterrorism. Somehow I don't think, probably for want of time or otherwise, the chemical disasters or chemical terrorism itself is not being discussed today at length, though we can never forget the Bhopal gas tragedy. That kind of tragedy can occur anywhere, in any city, by any city, and we should be prepared for this. Now, one of the great problems I found whenever we were studying this is the tremendous cynicism that accompanies as a reaction to people when you go and tell them that we have to prepare ourselves for nuclear or biological terrorism. Incidentally, I must tell you, in NIAS, we conducted a study, made a small paper for very restricted circulation among people about an imaginary anthrax attack on Bangalore. We took a particular place in the city, assumed that 100 grams of anthrax powder will be released, and then we took the weather conditions, the airspeed, etc. We tried to find out how far it proceeds. We did some mathematical modeling. We then found how many people will be infected, how many will have to be hospitalized, how many cases would be fatal. All this we did. And then we found whether Bangalore is in any way prepared for such an attack. The answer was, you should know, nil. Nobody was prepared. And you would be very surprised. The kind of reaction, they went to the government doctors. One of my research assistants went there. I sent her there saying that, find out. First of all, they didn't know what she's talking about. And secondly, she said, nothing has happened here. Why are you creating all this fear and panic? What for? Get out. That is the end of the matter. So in India, one of the biggest problems is, till it happens, you think it will not happen. As I was jokingly telling somebody, when your neighbor dies, you don't think one of these days you will also die. So this is the greatest problem of convincing people that you should prepare yourself for a day when a nuclear, it may not be nuclear bomb attack, it can be RDD, that what I call the dirty bomb attacks, or an anthrax attack, or some other biological terrorist attack. It's a fact. These two are low probability, but extremely high cost to the society. This latter thing you should never forget when it happens. Now, it is also a fact that the RDD, radio dialogue device, is not a killer, I mean like an atom bomb, but it's a weapon of mass panic, weapon of mass disruption. When somebody tells you in Brigade Road, a dirty bomb has gone through and there's a lot of radioactivity, what do you think will happen? Every road leading out of Bangalore will be chock-a-block with buses, motorcycles, cars, and there will be pell-mell. But it may not happen today, it may not, but there is a possibility of happening, and we have to prepare for that. Now, there are two ways of nuclear disaster. One is the atom bomb, which can be dropped, which is extremely low probability, I agree. The second is accident, nuclear accident, like 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl. At least in Bangalore, you don't have it yet nearby. Kaiga is quite a distance away. So the third possibility is a very strong possibility because it is RDD, or a dirty bomb, a radiological dispersion device as you call it, is mixing of the TNT with radioactive material and exploding it. It will only cause panic, it will not kill a lot. But then you have to prepare for a day to evacuate people, clean up the place, and who is going to do it? The first responder, the police, the medical personnel who have to be trained for all those things. So we have to prepare ourselves for that day. The capacity development, as I call it. The police, invariably police have to be there, security forces have to be there, and they have to be trained and they have to be protected to get to that area. Today we find, of course, in some places I have seen, the traffic policemen don't even wear their mask to save themselves, and many of them probably die young with lung diseases. So this is a very real thing that's happening today, but what happens when this happens? You have to train the policemen how to behave, what to wear, and where to go. I won't go into other details because the experts, and we have some of the most experienced and eminent experts. I had the privilege of being a colleague of Mr. Krishnan for quite some time when we worked together. Then the bioterrorism. Again the same thing. When this happens, are we all prepared? First of all, would you be able to recognize there has been a bioterrorist attack? Is it a natural attack? Or is it man-made attack? Two, the second is origin. Are we in a position to now, or the hospitals or the laboratories are able to locate the origin of this pathogen, where it has come from? And then, when people fall ill, are you adequately supplied with medications to save them? And then training people, training doctors. First of all, this is one of the things we studied in this anthrax attack. When will the doctors know there has been an anthrax attack? Because the first 2-3 days, the symptoms are very similar, including fever, and you will think it's a flu. At what stage you decide these are victims of anthrax attack? And then what do you do about it? Do you have enough stock? First of all, we found there are not enough beds, additional beds which will be required. Two, there are not enough stocks of antibiotics and so on and so forth to treat the people with. So these are all very real problems when we are dealing with it. We need orderly evacuation, we need transport, we need to protect the first responders, the policemen, hospital beds, medicines, cleanup of the area. So prevention is one aspect, but in spite of preventive measures, if it had happened, relief and rehabilitation later are things. So I won't say much more on this because this is something which I dare not do it with the experts sitting here. I think at the first stage I may call upon my former colleague, Mr. Krishnan, who is extremely... I'm so sorry. Mr. Krishnan, whom I know personally, is extremely experienced on this issue along with his colleague. He'll speak first on radiological disasters or nuclear disasters, followed by Colonel who will speak on the biological, not on the chemical. So, Krishnan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's certainly a great pleasure to be on the days with you after having worked for some time with you. It's an unusual experience for a person with a scientific background like me to face an audience of this kind. We are normally used to speaking to scientists, but I find that there are lots of administrators here. I hope I'm able to convey to you what I intend to clearly. The chairman spoke about radiological, chemical, biological kinds of disasters. But to me, it seems the most challenging is going to be the nuclear threat. Well, as the chairman pointed out, there are two types of nuclear threats. One is a stockpile weapon being used in conditions of conflict by an adversary state. This would most probably be set off high above the ground. And mind you, this may not be an isolated incident. If it's conflict conditions, you may probably even have to face more than one event of this kind. The second is the surprise attack by a terror group with an improvised device, improvised nuclear device. I'm not referring to radiological dispersion device. Perhaps I should point out why I am not looking at these. You know, in the case of the chemical, biological, radiological devices, you will still have transport and communication facilities available, except perhaps in the narrow region where the chemical explosives are mixed. But in the case of the nuclear threat, it's very, very different. A surprise attack by a terror group with an improvised device is the second one. Now, this is likely to be of a lower yield, perhaps, but it will explode at ground level, and there are significant differences between the airburst and the ground level. Now, many reports have been published about the likely mass casualties in the event of a nuclear explosion. Our focus here is on the management of the consequences to facilitate early rescue and recovery. Most of the published reports take their cue from the well-documented open sources of the US experience of tests in dry desert conditions. The attacks on the Japanese cities are the only instances of an explosion in the urban environment. There are, however, differences between the Japanese cities and the modern ones now. Now, this is a typical Japanese scene in Hiroshima. It was taken by apparently the US forces before the explosion. Note the crowded array of low-slung wooden houses. Now, the next picture is that of a model in the Hiroshima Museum. Provides you a contrast before and after. The left side is the scene before and the right side is the scene after. Note the total decimation of the houses. They collapsed like a pack of cards due to the shock wave. A firestorm that began to rage about 20 minutes after the explosion razed them to the ground. If you look carefully, you see a few structures still standing. On the left side in this slide, on the left in this slide is one of those structures which still stood. It is an RCC building about 300 meters from ground zero. It suffered no serious structural damage from the shock wave or the fire. Although so close to ground zero, half of the inmates of the building are reported to have survived. The other two buildings were also about 500 meters from the ground zero, and they survived. Now let us turn to Bangalore. This is one picture of a part of Bangalore, an aerial view, with rows of brick and concrete buildings, typical of big cities in India. Maybe not as sturdy as those buildings in Hiroshima and could collapse due to shock wave. Now we had a building collapse somewhere near Bangalore. I think these are perhaps because of faulty workmanship and materials of construction being very poor in quality. It would seem to me that while these buildings themselves may collapse, they are not likely to be fire prone as those wooden houses in Hiroshima. But still, they could contain much combustible material. One can think of the gas cylinders in the kitchens, fuel tanks of the vehicles, and there are huge numbers of them, plastics inside which will give rise to harmful pollutants. We need to have estimates of the combustible load in the cities to be able to assess the likely scale of destruction due to fire. If we don't have that kind of information, it's going to be very difficult. Now, a brief account of what happens in a nuclear explosion would be useful. Consider the case of the much studied Hiroshima bomb. By the way, I think I must clarify one thing here. It was mentioned earlier during this session that generations of people are still suffering as a result of the Hiroshima bomb. I think that needs to be corrected, that impression needs to be corrected, because after 4 decades of continuous health survey of the survivors, they have not been able to see any hereditary effects even up to the 3rd generation. There have been, of course, cancer cases right through. Some of them appeared yearly, some of them are still appearing, but no hereditary effects so far. Now, if you consider this Hiroshima event, it went off at about 600 meters above the ground. The height was deliberately chosen to maximize the area of destruction due to shock wave. It had an yield of 16 kT. This was subsequently very religiously calculated. Now, the explosion created a temperature of 10 million degrees, vaporizing everything in the device and forming a fireball. You see the fireball here. At the instant of explosion, there was a pulse of intense nuclear radiation followed by another pulse of intense heat radiation. These two together killed most people near ground zero who were in the direct line of sight of the explosion. Now, those buildings that you saw did not really protect them very much from the nuclear or the heat radiation. Within a fraction of the second, the temperature in the fireball dropped to 1000 degrees and the radioactive vapor cloud had begun rising higher still. You see that here in this picture. In less than a minute, the cloud had risen to a height of 2.5 kilometers and to 8 kilometers by 4 minutes. It finally settled at a height of about 12 kilometers in 11 minutes. But mind you, the firestorm came much later, and also it is not necessary that a similar event elsewhere would give rise to a similar height of the cloud. They have had in the desert environment in the US yields of different levels. They find that the height of the cloud does vary a bit. The advantage is that if the height is as high as 8 to 12 kilometers, you will find that there is very little of fallout. And that is what happened in Hiroshima. The rapid gain in height and the dispersion after that resulted in the radioactivity content being diluted. There was little fallout in the city itself, and the fallout elsewhere caused radiation levels not so significant to be of concern. Now let's go to the actual assessment. This was done by the US Army after the attack. It was estimated that 90% of the people had been killed within half a kilometer. And then there was a gradual decrease in deaths with distance, and within 1.5 to 2 kilometers, it was just about 30%. But then, as the distance increased, the number of people who had severe injuries, as you can see from the gray bars in this, and those who had, let us say, slightly injured, the numbers increased up to about 2 to 2.5 kilometers and then was brought down. Now, those who survived in the instantaneous pulses of nuclear radiation and heat by being indoor were killed when the buildings collapsed due to the shock wave and the secondary fires. In fact, some people claim that the reason why the firestorm came 20 minutes later is that the choice of the time for explosion was also very carefully chosen to be about 8 o'clock in the morning, when breakfast is being prepared in all the kitchens, and the shock wave collapsing the houses actually upset the fires, and then that created the actual firestorm. And mind you, also in Nagasaki there was no firestorm. So you can't really extrapolate from one place to another. There are various other environmental conditions that must also be taken into account. Now, in a city like Bangalore, the intensity of the instantaneous pulses of heat and nuclear radiation would clearly be attenuated inside the brick and concrete buildings. Likewise, the power of the shock wave is also likely to be borne by the buildings in front, while those behind would face less of it. But the shock wave is likely to advance farther along the roads because it has a free way. Now, those survivors inside the buildings but near glass windows might be seriously injured by the flying glass pieces. And today we find that there are large buildings coming up with huge glass panels. Now, some of the survivors who are close to ground zero would need immediate assistance. Reaching them will pose a very great challenge. Very often you see pictures where you see cigar-shaped paths of the fallout following a nuclear explosion, but that is not necessarily true. Now you find that you need to take into account the wind direction changes and wind speed changes with height and over time. Now, in the case of a nuclear explosion at ground levels, this becomes very much more significant. Now, in the case of a ground burst, the fireball touches the ground and vaporizes everything in its path. A crater is formed at ground zero. Large amounts of the soil are also picked up by the rising cloud. Radioactive material from the weapon sticks to the soil particles in the cloud. The heavier particles, they tend to fall out much closer to the ground zero, while the lighter ones are carried farther. The winds at ground level also are slow, and the fallout spreads a little more slowly, and it could vary in direction over time. In the absence of buildings, burns and serious radiation injuries can be expected all around, as it happened in Hiroshima, up to a 2-kilometer range for a 10 kiloton explosion. But the presence of buildings changes the picture. As I mentioned earlier, one may expect survivors in places close to ground zero, and they may need timely assistance. Some of them may choose to get away quickly. It would be safer for them to wait indoor unless there is fear of fire spreading to their area. If they choose to move without proper instruction, they may end up running into areas contaminated by the fallout and receive dangerous levels of exposure. Now, how do we communicate to them in good time as to what they should do and what they should not do? Now, the degree of protection from fallout in the case of the ground burst to be expected inside the brick and concrete buildings can vary. This picture tells you about it. It ranges from a factor of 3 at ground level for a house with at least 1 floor above. The middle floor of a 3-storied building can provide you a protection factor of 7. In apartment blocks, we have a large numbers of them coming up now. You will find that the middle floors can give you a protection factor of up to 20. There are buildings that are now coming up with basements, and they would be ideal because they can provide you protection factors of up to 200, even 100 to 200. Now let us now turn to the information needed for management of the emergency. First indication of a nuclear explosion could come from people far enough not to be affected by it, who might notice the brilliant flash in the ascending cloud. Again, there is a caveat here. If you have directly seen the brilliant flash, you may have flash blindness, and you may even have damages to your retina. But then there are others who might perhaps be able to sense something very serious, and they might perhaps be able to convey information to others. Now, instant disruption of communications and transport would serve to confirm that there has been such a massive incident like this. As I mentioned earlier, this is a characteristic feature of nuclear threats. Proper plans for response would require information on the yield of the weapon, the height of burst, and the location at the earliest. Now, how do we get it? Now, we know that it is possible to have optical sensors to provide information on location and yield by detecting the light signal emitted in the explosion. There are 2 pulses that are coming up, and there is a minimum in between, and the time between the minimum and the second pulse gives you an idea of the yield. So it's possible. Now, these detectors can be mounted in satellites or on the ground. Infrasonic detectors can also indicate the yield, but they need to be located in places with low background noise. Now, we need to have a detection capability if it is not already there. We don't know if it is already there. Now, whether we have those detectors or not, you will find that very quickly the international monitoring system of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization will come out, put out the information on the location, yield, and the type of device, whether it is uranium or plutonium or whatever it is. They'll come out with a lot of information. But I think we must have our own means of detecting this kind of an event. Nothing can be done about the prompt effects of heat and nuclear radiation and the shock waves. But in the case of a ground explosion, it's possible to save people from getting undue exposure to residual nuclear radiation from the cloud overhead and the fallout. Now, we have today the capability in this country to be able to draw meteorological information from open sources and use it to predict the path of the fallout. What is done is you have this National Center for Environmental Predictions in US and the National Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting in India. These are two sources of global met information. These data are collected, and you also need some local met data, and we have the capability to generate local weather forecasts. This is possible in the case of nuclear power plant sites. This dispersion of the radioactive particles in the cloud can then be followed, and you can get the path and progression of the fallout. This has been done, and this has actually been verified, validated in the case of the Fukushima release. Now, it is possible to have these predictions become available within about an hour if we are so organized. Perhaps if we are better organized, even faster. You saw in the case of the chemical accident in that documentary how within about 15 minutes they were able to do this. Now, we have supercomputers too, which are required for this purpose, and all this can be done as quickly as possible. We have the technological capability, only it has to be marshaled. Now, with that information, it should be possible to provide advice to people whether they should stay indoor, if so for how long, when to move out, and in what direction, and so on. Now, this is a validation that we have had done for the Fukushima case. Now, we had information about the releases. You need to know the source term. Okay, we had information from the source term after some time, and then we put this particular code to use. You find here that the black dots are the actual measurements, and the red dots are the calculated ones. I would say that this is fairly good agreement for the first time validation, and as time goes on, we might be able to perfect our calculations even better. Now, what is also to be noticed is that there could be variations year-wise. In the various seasons of the year, various months of the year, you can have different ways in which the path and dispersion of the fallout occurs. And it would be good to have for a city, for any given city, to have this kind of thing actually calculated. They have been looking at various types of emergencies that can occur in a city, and they are trying to get a database of all the various assets that you would need. Now, following a nuclear explosion, multiple agencies, each with large teams and special expertise, will swing into action to provide help to the people in the affected parts of the city. This work has to be coordinated to ensure success. Now, we can use the vast memory and high processing speed afforded by present-day computers and develop modeling techniques for dynamic analysis of the event, just as what you saw in the documentary earlier, and the actions as they unfold. We can exploit the GIS system, data mining, and statistical analysis for the purpose. Now, what is most important is that we should have a visual representation of all the information so generated on multiple screens in what can be called a decision analysis platform to facilitate decision making by the central authorities. Now, this is what CSTEP is engaged in. They have embarked on the development of DARPAN, as they call that, a decision analysis platform for research and planning for emergency management. In the context of nuclear threats, they are now modeling the destruction in the inner zone through heat, initial burst of radiation, and the blast wave for a given yield and a height of burst. Modeling is only one part of the task. The comprehensive database of the rescue assets available in the city must be established to know which of them remain unaffected and can be used. Much of the relevant data on the various wards of the city of Bangalore have been collected by CSTEP. It is still a work in progress. It's not easy to collect this kind of information. Now, this picture gives you the idea about the hospitals in this city. All those blue dots here, they represent the hospitals. There are about 54 of them indicated here. Now, the circles here, they mark the pressure zones, 5 psi to 2 to 5 psi and 0.5 to 2 psi. Now, you can, if you have a picture of this kind, for not only the pressure zones, for radiation zones and things like that, and also you can have in the same picture the assets like police stations, fire stations, clinics, various other things. That gives an immediate picture to the management to find out in which direction the responders should move, in which direction the affected people should be moved. Now, this is a complete database that CSTEP is looking at. Types of buildings, slums included, fire stations, police stations, doctors, hospitals, clinics. These are very important, as I will tell you a little later. Pharmacies, electrical substations, mobile towers and telephone exchanges, petrol bunks, large public buildings. All of these are required. Now, some of the assets for rescue and recovery that you see here, the Bangalore police stations, Bangalore hospitals, this is just an example. Now, there are many other things that they have done, but I am not able to show you the time here. But then they also need to collect a lot more data. Now, two key requirements I would like to point out here, which is that training of medical personnel. Now, whether it is chemical, biological, radiological or nuclear, I think the key is to have sufficiently well trained medical personnel, especially in the case of a nuclear threat. I think we need to have people who understand what is what. If you don't have that, it becomes very difficult. Now, for effective management of the emergency, the role of the medical personnel is very crucial. There will be cases of injuries compounded with radioactive contamination. The doctors should be able to handle such cases with care and without fear. Now, it may be required for the doctors to find out what is the radiation exposure the person has received and what special care the person would need and where to send him. Now, the first thing that can be done is to assess the complete blood count of the person, and that will give you an idea of what the radiation dose is and whether the person requires very serious treatment or not. So that is where I think the hospitals and clinics come into picture, because CBCs can be done very quickly, but then we will have large numbers of people to be handled. So somehow I think we need to be equipped for these things. Now, in the case of the Fukushima accident, very interestingly, the Japanese Medical Association sent 1,000 members of that association to that area to monitor the people for radiation levels as well. They were all very well trained to handle cases of radioactive contamination and in monitoring people for radiation exposure. If our medical professionals can equip themselves for providing such a service, they would be making a very useful contribution. But that kind of familiarization can come only if it is introduced right at the MBBS course, so that all doctors are capable of rendering such service to some extent or another. Now, in the case of communicating to people, if there is no way that you can talk to people, the mobile phones will be out of action. People with the mobile phones in the affected area can neither call nor be called because mobile towers would be affected. How do you communicate to them? I think public education on how to respond to such an emergency until proper advice from the authorities is received is very essential. But that proper advice might take time to come. So what we need to do is educate the people on what may have to be done by themselves. If the public are educated, they can also function as first responders and help others. And this kind of education also must come perhaps at the school level itself, and from then on it must be perhaps expanded at higher levels. So these are the two thoughts that I would like to leave you with, the two important actions that must be taken even now, which will be useful for any other type of emergency as well. Address the medical professionals training and address public education. Now today, as was mentioned, is the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. Now this is not only an occasion for us to remind ourselves of the need for abolition of nuclear weapons. Until that comes about, the logical conclusion would be that we need to be able to protect the citizens from nuclear threat. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishnan, for an excellent presentation of what needs to be done when you have a nuclear emergency. I just would like to add a couple of things here, which is not from Krishnan's expertise. One of the biggest problems about the nuclear issue is the perception management. The Kudankulam proved it. All kinds of rumors were sent, and it was believed. There was a huge protest, and probably atomic energy was not initially able to handle what should have been a perception management. The second, atomic energy establishment, whatever people might say, has had one of the best track records of managing nuclear power in these countries. We have 17 power reactors, we have 5 research reactors, and 6 power reactors. 6 power reactors are under construction. We haven't had a Chernobyl, we haven't had a 3 Mile Island. We have had nothing. I mean, there has been Kaiga, the roof collapsed, etc., but that is more salient than nuclear. I would also like to just leave a thought with you. The period of 1960 to 2005 showed there are only about 150, now I'm talking about 45 years. There have been only 150 fatalities attributable to radiation. A number is bad, compared to more than 5,000 fatalities in coal mine accidents and 1.2 million deaths in automobile accidents. So there is a lot of hype about the nuclear power, a proper perception management. And when an accident takes place, anything takes place, the most important thing is to manage the panic among the public. And this is something on which the information group of the government needs to be trained, using TV, using media, whatever. Thank you. Now may I call upon Dr. Colonel Shailesh Kulkarni to speak on bioterrorism, please.
May I have permission? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Gaikwad requested me to say something about my faculty where I am posted right now, about in a couple of minutes. What exactly my faculty does there? We are faculty of nuclear, biological, chemical protection, working under, administratively working under College of Military Engineering, Pune. We train tri-services personnel, that is Army, Navy, Air Force officers, and personnel below officers rank, that is Jawans and junior commissioned officers as well as paramilitary forces, civil defense personnel, and civilian scientists from different streams. We are in collaboration with DRDO, DRDE, and BARC, Bhabha Atomic Research Center, for our day-to-day running of curricula and visits. We have liaison with various national investigation agencies as well as the National Institute of Virology, Hopkins Institute, so for the biological part is concerned. Before I begin my presentation today pertaining to biodisaster and biological terrorism, its interface and management, I thought about, while I was sitting here, that gastric emptying time of human being is around 20 to 25, 30 minutes. That is, food gets below the stomach in half an hour. But the kind of food the organizers provided to us, I don't think it has still gone down. It's still stuck up there somewhere. And I request organizers not to have such a sumptuous meal next workshop. Do invite me though. Well, ladies and gentlemen, at the onset, I would like to thank the Government of Karnataka, the officers of Bangalore Metropolitan City, and Synergia Foundation for inviting me to address this August gathering. I feel proud and humble as well being here on the dais. on behalf of my organization. I'll try to put forth the interface between these two terminologies. No doubt it's a very, very vast topic to dwell upon and arrive at conclusions in very short time. The multiple factors like scientific advances in biotechnology, genetics, ethical issues involved in use of microbes, the microbial substances, as killing machines, medico-legal aspects of accidental escape of such agents resulting in unprecedented disasters, health and economic fallout of such incidences. And these factors essentially drive this topic to invite luminaries to contribute in this subject matter. While I think about such incidents, when we talk about CBRN disasters, that is, earlier it was a terminology called nuclear, biological and chemical. Now it has graduated to CBRN, that R factor has come in, that is radiological, as the chairperson introduced us to. Radiological disasters, dirty bomb, that is RDD, that is radiological dispersion device. You don't have to use actually a fission technology or fusion technology to cause disasters, but use a common explosive laced with radiological material, nucleotides, and exploded. Contamination is the main issue here. While C, R, and N factors have been always discussed in capitals, while B is always in small. It has never been discussed in capitals. And ladies and gentlemen, it's indeed high time we take the cognizance of this fact and give its due importance to small b, converting it into capital B. I must congratulate the organizers of this workshop for taking this B seriously and address it in an appropriate manner, which it deserves. Yes, Shri Tushar Girinath, the Secretary of Disaster Management Revenue Department, I am personally indebted to him for this particular endeavor. So what is biodisaster? Biodisaster is nothing but the events, those result in death, disability and destruction of human, plant and animals because of intentional use or accidental escape of microbial agents. We in armed forces try to simplify things. Most of the men in uniform will agree with me that we see life in black and white. Though some shades of gray thrown in between, we might identify, but most of us are colorblind. Colors confuse us. It is easy to make men understand the causes of biodisasters in military parlance and as military causes and non-military causes. Military causes necessarily involve the biological warfare agents, their employment in war. While as the non-military causes have accidents due to the negligent handling of biological warfare agents while being processing. It's not possible now. The biological war is not possible now because 179 countries have signed to Biological and Toxin Warfare Convention Treaty and have ratified that. So it's very rarity now that ever biological agent will be used in active war. But toxins derived out of biological agents as well as the microbes, those if fall in hands of the terrorists, it is a real threat. And one of them is one of the important factors is bioterrorism. Bioterrorism is essentially an intentional use of microorganisms to achieve the nefarious designs by rogue nation, terrorists, non-state actors, or who knows, by a crackpot scientist as well. If may I draw your attention to the words written in the bracket in yellow on the view file. The intention of bioterrorism is not to cause death on mass scale. It is the intention, or the bottom line is, to create panic, mass hysteria, mass displacement of population, resulting in total breakdown of morale and economy of the nation. There has been a paradigm shift in the world of scientific community with respect to the concept of bioterrorism. There was a prevailing overconfidence amongst the states, security agencies, scientists, and population as well, that terrorist organizations will never use biological agents as weapons of terror. Recent discoveries by security establishments world over indicate that Al-Qaeda has shown keen interest in procuring and cultivating anthrax bacilli. A Japanese cult, Om Shinrikyo, in about 15-20 years ago, tried to lay its hand upon Clostridium botulinum bacteria while it broke out in African subcontinent under the garb of social service for the victims. It is believed that Acharya Rajneesh was deported after US authorities found out that his disciples tried to infect the salad bars in Oregon during the local municipal corporation elections to influence the results with Salmonella typhi, that is a bacterium causing typhoid fever, to influence the local elections. They sprinkled this fluid in the local salad bars to make people sick. And last year, Pakistani Prime Minister Mr. Gilani's office received an envelope containing anthrax powder as well. It was sent from the Sindh province. So the list is endless. I mean, the history is replete with use of biological warfare agents in active war, and slowly the warfare of biological origin got converted or graduated into biological terrorism. How well is India placed against biodisaster due to bioterrorism is the matter we wish to look on today. Although there is no proof of use of microbes in India as terror weapon, no one can confidently say that all the actors are in place to create such a situation where bioterrorist attack might occur any day. All the resources are easily available off the shelf in the market, which can be easily put into construct a viable bioweapon. Which is the matter of concern is population is by and large unaware of, including health workers, except little scientific community that has such threats exist. Recent outbreaks of swine flu, plague, etc., and re-emerging diseases like Hanta virus infections, Nipah virus infections in Andhra Pradesh, notwithstanding the general apathy of the common population and all the stakeholders towards such an eventology. Now, without wasting time, let me spell out the desirable characteristics of biological terror agents in terrorist perspective. He would like to have a minimum quantity of microbes with high efficiency, having known or predictable incubation period. Now, incubation period is the time of entry of microbe into the human body and the first emergence of symptom in the host, the time taken in between. As the chairperson told us, the biological attack, if it has happened somewhere, we will only come to know when the hordes of people start reporting sick and start reporting to the hospitals. It is not necessary that attack has taken place then and there. It might have occurred some time back. Now that period is different. That period is irrespective to that particular agent which has been used. It's agent-specific period. So some agents have very short incubation period. For example, cholera has about few hours of incubation period, 7 hours to 12 hours, while as HIV has years of incubation period. I remember a case of rabies virus, excuse me, rabies infection that has happened 16 years ago. A dog bite, history of dog bite was given 16 years ago by the mother, while the child in adulthood came to the civil hospital as a case of frank hydrophobia. So, a terrorist would like to have a minimum quantity of biological agent to be dispersed with high efficiency, high toxicity, and easy dissemination technology. If I were to select the microbe for terror attack, I would certainly like it to be transmissible from person to person. I would like it to be contagious in nature. So, I would require a minimal quantity of it. Release it in the air in aerosol format and vanish from the scene. And that it would be only possible if the agent is stable to the environmental vagaries. That means if the agent is resistant to the temperature variations, the humidity variations, if it has undergone microencapsulation, then obviously it will sustain the environmental vagaries to stay longer in the air for dispensation. I would also like the target population not immunized against the microbe, and lack of any treatment modality existent would be an added boon to the terror attack. Now, what are the attributes of microbes making them ideal terrorist weapon leading to biodisaster? We don't have a very prudent identification and detection system in place. The detection and identification of biological warfare agents or terror agents, it's a very complex issue because the ambient air is always contaminated with hundreds and thousands of varieties of microbes. Naturally, it is full with pollution. The various fumes, water vapors, pollens, dust, cow dung particles, so on and so forth. List is very much there to see. And amongst them, if any agent is released, at that point of time, the detection system has to pick up only those agents which have been released for that particular intention. So that has to be very, very highly selective. It has to be sensitive because if we are talking about the lesser quantity to be released in the atmosphere, that means the terrorist organizations will leave that particular agent in a small quantity. So the detection and identification agent has to pick up the smallest quantity possible. So we require high sensitivity, high specificity, as well as we want results yesterday. That means speed. So all three S are very, very important here. And all the three factors incorporated in one single technology is very difficult to come by. Now, every technology has its own pros and cons. Polymerase chain reaction technology we do have as on date, but it has got its own limitations. The smaller or the miniaturization of technology, that means higher cost. Though it can be deployed in the forward areas, the cost is very, very prohibitive. Coming back to the slide, the ease of delivery and low persistence after the delivery of these agents are matter to be concerned of most. They can be virtually produced in the backyard kitchen laboratories, easily delivered with rudimentary technology like fogging machines or aerosol dissemination like deodorant cans and so forth. Many of these bioagents are readily available in the nature. They are abundantly available in nature. What we call in medical parlance the normal commensals of the soil, and can be easily modified genetically in the laboratories. The most horrifying advantages of biological weapon, a terror weapon, is that it can multiply. It essentially multiplies in the human body. And if microbe is contagious, the effect can be felt nationwide, if not globally, in the short possible time. The excellent example is of swine flu. It spread globally just within 6 weeks. Originated in Mexico and spread globally within 6 weeks. It reached almost three continents far away in New Zealand in just 6 weeks. Employment of microbiological weapon does not occur with flash or bang, or you cannot hear, you cannot see that exploding, or you cannot smell it even. So it is always clandestinely used. They can be called as a poor man's atom bomb, and due to their low production cost. Besides, after the successful employment of such agents, entire infrastructure remains intact. Not like nuclear bomb, that is, everything is destroyed because of heat wave, shock wave, and radiation. The area remains contaminated for long period. It does not happen with the biological weapon. It doesn't destroy the property. The fans will run, the air conditioner will run. Nothing will happen. Only people will die. So it particularly affects the living things around. Not always the bioterror weapons are blessed with advantages. There are some disadvantages also. The most important deterrent to the terrorist organizations to use these agents is that microbes are unpredictable in nature. They are uncontrollable. Once you release them, you don't have any control over them. They have their own mind. They might stay dormant for unspecified time, depending on their genetic configuration, or they might just go berserk. They are uncontrollable. Once you release them, you have released them. You cannot recall them back. So they might turn around and affect the aggressor himself. So that particular thought of risk is always there because of the very nature of the illness. Because these agents don't kill you instantly, they kill you slowly. So that particular thought is always a deterrent in the terrorist's mind. They know this. Other factors which are beyond control of terrorists are density of target population. If it is sparse, very sparsely located locality, then obviously you can't waste so much of biological weapon on them. The susceptibility of the microbe is again a person specific and community specific. If at all such attacks come to be known in the world community, the stigma attached with this kind of an attack is again unbearable for that organization which is fighting for certain cause. If they have an ideology, the terrorist organization today have an ideology. As the first session of today's presentation we went through, that almost all the terrorist organizations do have the ideological basis. So they cannot choose randomly the biological attack for creating terror because they will be labeled as inhuman. Their cause will be defeated. I feel the most important factor to deter the terrorist organization against the use of this agent is severe attrition rate while you are disseminating them. That means when we are using a fogging machine or say aerosol technology to dispense, the viability of organisms once they come out of the canister is very low. Almost 5 to 6% organisms survive. That much of low survivability is there. So you require in practically in employment of these weapons, you require huge quantity. Biological agents can be classified as bacteria, viruses, rickettsia, fungi, toxins and genetically altered microorganisms. But most important, what I am going to talk about today is bacteria, viruses and biological toxins. They're based on physical characteristics of their cell structure. There are two more types of classification, such as based on Center for Disease Control, Atlanta, Georgia, USA. That is category A, category B and category C biological agents, depending on their virulence, ease of production and ease of dissemination, storage, all those factors, parameters. And third classification is a military classification which we use in armed forces, is based on against human, against plant and against animals. So it is easier one to remember for the uniformed people. So let me move on to some favorite microbes which are hot favorites of the terrorist perspective. These microbes have been extensively studied, worked upon and manipulated, experimented to be found that they are too good to be used as a potential bioweapons. Amongst the favorite bacterial agents is Bacillus anthracis, which causes a disease called as anthrax. And this disease spreads by inhalation, ingestion, as well as the contamination of the wounds because of spores of these bacteria. Most deadly is the inhalational type of anthrax, affecting lungs or respiratory system. This variety, inhalational anthrax, has got about 26 to 27% of lethality or mortality rate if it is untreated. So it essentially comes in the lethal organism. This is the toughest known organism, toughest known bacteria. This can be used as a bioweapon very easily. It is resistant to bleach. The Russians tried this many times to bleach these organisms, but they couldn't make them die. As compared to other organisms, it is quite easy to weaponize. All you need is to grow these bacteria by culture methodology in some backyard, convert it into aqueous format, then lyophilize it, that means to take out the water content out of it, mix it with some talcum powder at the max, or say magnesium powder, and release it in the atmosphere. So it's so easy. Second organism, that is plague, caused by Yersinia pestis. It can be released as aerosol. Japanese used it. Plague is caused by, again, as I mentioned, Yersinia pestis, transmitted by a rat flea to human beings after they feed on the infected wild rodents. Plague is abundantly available in the wild. It is normal commensa. Two types of plagues are there. One is pneumonic plague and second is bubonic plague. Pneumonic plague affects the lungs. Bubonic plague affects the lymphatic system of the body. And pneumonic variety is lethal and transmissible as well from person to person. And it is transferred by the droplet infection. If we sneeze, if we cough, and if we cough in the hands and then shake hands with the other person, it might get transmitted like common flu. However, treatment is widely available now. But the beauty of this bacteria is that it can be easily manipulated because of its large DNA structure and converted into more deadly organism. Other bacteria of interest in perspective of weapon are cholera, which is highly lethal and contagious, typhoid, debilitating, not lethal but debilitating, as the carrier stage persists for years together if the cases are treated inadequately, and some diarrheal agents. These agents can be used clandestinely by contaminating the potable water supply or food source. Coming on to viruses, virus as a potentially most disaster weapon is smallpox. Now, the family of pox viruses contain monkeypox, mousepox, chickenpox, etc. Since WHO declared world free of smallpox in 1980, the production of smallpox vaccine has stopped long ago. Now, officially, there are only two sources of smallpox viruses, two samples that has been kept in CDC Atlanta, and one is Moscow, vector Moscow. But it is believed that there are 10 other samples available worldwide. But if at all the terrorist organizations could lay their hands upon such samples which are less protected and steal away these samples, use them, then I don't know what kind of magnitude this outbreak will have. The other members of pox virus family, they differ structurally only in 1%. 99% of the entire pox family is similar. Mousepox, chickenpox, smallpox, all these orthopox, they are all similar to each other. Only 1% make them different from each other. If this 1% can be manipulated and converted with a genomic code which is responsible for causing mass death, and that can be incorporated in the less virulent form and use it, then we have a potential bioweapon on our hands that cannot be controlled anymore. Smallpox was used by the Japanese on Chinese population during the World War II. Unit 731 was a secret establishment of Japanese imperial forces that time, which was specifically given this task to use smallpox. Lakhs of Chinese died in that. Smallpox virus is an excellent weapon. The pox family is a big family. And the conversion of any other pox virus into smallpox or even more deadlier than smallpox is a doable task. One might ask whether it's possible or not. Genetic engineering and biotechnology today, it's very, very easy. Easy cultivability of this virus and the high virulence, transmissibility, easy transmissibility, the character is transmissible, contagious in nature, that makes it a favorite terror weapon. If at all, it can be made available to the terrorist organization because it spreads through the droplet infection again. It means it spreads through the breathing, the infected air. And everyone breathes. You can't stop breathing. One can stop having infected water or infected food material. You can boil it and drink it. Some basic preventive measures can be taken, but no one can stop breathing. One has to breathe every minute. So it's not possible. It requires only small laboratory setup to achieve this feat. So Smallpox is again a very, very important virus or microbe to watch for. Some other potential viruses, those can be watched for. Their use in bioterrorism is the potential viral agents are Ebola virus. It was discovered in Zaire and Sudan in 1976. The world witnessed outbreak of Ebola in 1995 in Zimbabwe. 319 people were affected. Very few deaths were reported because viral infections, unless they are lethal, they are self-limiting. They are usually self-limiting. The nature has taken care of itself. Marburg virus, Lassa virus, endemic to African continent. It again spreads to the respiratory route, hence can be released in aerosol format. It spreads to the direct contact as well as in blood transfusion also. Hantavirus, 2 cases, they were reported in Hyderabad in 2012, February. These 2 cases were re-emergent. They come under the CDC Atlanta classification category C. All these important diseases which were once existing took a back seat, laid back. Now again they are re-emerging with some kind of their structural changes and symptoms and signs changes in them. They are called as emerging pathogens. Those are categorized under group C. And these also can be spread through the direct contact. They have been existing for centuries, but they were dormant. The dengue virus, it has undergone 5 mutations in last 5 years. So it's a common hemorrhagic viral fever, which is spread by the vector like mosquito. In Indian scenario, the health scenario in Indian cities and slums, it is pathetic. I mean, one has to take care of community health. So, if at all some modification can be made in the mosquito's internal body structure and the viral structure of the viruses, DNA structure, you can practically cause an epidemic in the cities, and that cannot be controlled. One most important virus of interest is polio. It's a big DNA virus, again can be manipulated easily. India is on the verge of declaring itself polio free by this year end. And if the situation remains polio free for about 3 to 4 years, then slowly the pharmaceutical companies and the agencies which are producing the treatment for polio virus are going to stop the vaccine production. So if at all the polio virus is introduced at the later stage by importing some infected person from a valid visa, we have a problem again on our hands. So how the biotechnology and bioterrorism will go hand in hand. The DNA, RNA, the protein structures, all these studies pertaining to all the microscopic structures inside the viruses and bacteria, they deal with the biotechnology. Amendment of their internal organelles can be said achievable. And it's very, very easy to contemplate and achieve the results which we have gone to set out. This particular cartoon spells it out very, very clearly what the current generation of genetic engineering says. How it is possible to do that? I mentioned earlier, take a case of smallpox, identify the genome sequence which is responsible for creating lethal symptoms or killing pattern within the human being, replace it with mousepox. You have a mousepox virus which is able to kill so many people instead of using the smallpox virus. So, can it be done? Australians did it. In 2001, they were facing the menace by the wild mice. So they tried to utilize the mousepox to alter the immune response in the mice. When they proceeded to the genetic engineering to create a mousepox virus which was lethal for the mouse population but not the human population, they had a problem of own mutation of the mousepox virus that became lethal to the human being. So they quickly dropped that program. What are the other organisms? Not only the viruses are prone to the genetic mutation, but most of the other organisms like toxins and they can be modified into the more virulent formats like fungi, bacteria, rickettsia, so on and so forth. The list is endless. In such scenario, what can be done? Timely surveillance. The epidemic investigation has to be in place in a very, very robust manner. 4 steps I can summarize, that is to be aware of what biothreat is. Bioterrorism can happen. We have to accept this fact that bioterrorism can happen anytime. The time is of essence because we have wasted a lot of time on sitting back and contemplating about not to pay attention to this particular threat. Plan and be prepared. Disease surveillance modalities has to be on ground, and we better invest in research and development of various identification and detection technology equipments and rapid detection teams and rapid QRMT, as we call as quick reaction medical teams, to be identified and deployed in the shortest possible notice. Besides that, the stockpile of agent-specific medicines, like viral medicines are different from bacterial outbreaks. The antibiotics are used for bacterial infections, or antivirals are used for treating the viral infections. They cannot be mixed up. So adequate stockpile of antivirals, antibacterials, and antifungals have to be identified and catered for. Early recognition and reporting system, because this particular step is very important in preventing the spread of outbreak, to prevent the reach of this outbreak to various parts of the country. How do we do that? Approach the disease in a syndromic manner. Syndromic manner means the system involvement, because there is already existing illnesses among the society, so you cannot overlap the two things in between. The fresh outbreak caused by the bioterror attack has to be isolated and identified before you go on treating it. Work together. Medical personnel, the health authorities, national, international level, local level, state level, they have to be in cohesion. They have to exchange their ideas. They have to inform the developments. They have to gather the information, analyze it, and share it with them, share it with each other, including the police, civil police, which have to maintain the law and order situation intact, and intelligence agencies to find out from where this biothreat emanated. These are the very, very important steps. Those can be thought of before you contain the outbreak or bioterror outbreak. I have already covered this, the biodetection systems. Preventive measures, that is, educate the likely target population. Full international cooperation is required to be sought, and improve the monitoring technology. Monitoring technology we have a health grid presently available in India. A lot of states have invested heavily in creating the health information grid, health investigation grid, epidemiological grid. All we require is to connect them. Nodal centers require to be connected with each other, analyze it at the central level, the top level, and arrive at the conclusion in a real time. So if that is achievable, and that is achievable, if that is achieved, then we have, I can confidently say that we have fairly good say on control over the biological terror outbreak. If it's required, then probably we might require to employ a new agency or which has a legislative mandate to control such kind of terror attacks. I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. I've finished.
Thank you, Colonel Kulkarni, Dr. Kulkarni. That's an excellent presentation. In fact, listening to you, I feel more confident that we can deal with the subject on which I was not so sure so far. We have systems in place. I'd just like to add a couple of things about preparing pathogens or microorganisms. In US, There is a very interesting case discovered apparently, trying to develop microorganisms or pathogens from sewage water and trying to use it. I mean, it was detected in time, I am told. The only factor which is encouraging from our point of view, which militates against bioterrorism, is so far the history of terrorism shows that terrorists want to make an immediate statement. They want to be noticed immediately. The statements, political or otherwise, has to be known to the public and the government immediately. From that angle, bioterrorism is not an immediate affair. It takes time. And then it's very difficult to prove the terrorists did it and this terrorist. So that perhaps is the only saving grace, that a terrorist would rather resort to explosions than bioterrorism, but still we can't take the risk. Now we have about 15 minutes on this interesting subject. I told you it's usually accompanied by a lot of cynicism about the use of these two, but I can assure you we should take care of it. We should at least be prepared.